Hello, everybody, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Let's Talk Relationship. My name is Stefania Puglio from the Gentleman Square, and today we have an exciting show, a great topic, and I hope all you men out there and ladies are watching. And if you're not watching it now, catch it on the replay and let us know. Show us some love. Hashtag replay, hashtag live. So, what is our topic today? Today, we are going to be speaking about masculine role nurturing. That's right. We have a wonderful guest, Brian Balke. Brian is from California. So, we have uh, an American joining me, which I always get excited when I'm speaking to my fellow US people. For 40 years, Brian has been writing about love and appreciation and application to personal and social challenges. And after a lifetime of religious, political, and psychological study, he chose hypnotherapy. So he's one of my buddies and colleagues in hypnotherapy. And he's using hypnotherapy as the best method for offering the gift of love to the world. And as well as his work, he works with individuals, he speaks broadly on different topics. And today, our topic is going to be masculine role in nurturing. So let me bring on Brian. Hello, Brian Balke. Welcome.
Hello, Stefania. Wonderful to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for joining me. Thank you for joining me in today's conversation. And yes, it's a topic that comes close to a lot of us, both men and women. Masculine role in nurturing.
So let me start off with the story. A shout out to women, if I could.
Okay.
It's Mother's Day coming up here this Sunday, and
As it is here.
there's a story which is very germane to our topic today, which is one of the things that I noticed when I was a child growing up, particularly my teen years. The churches that we were at had a lot of lay involvement, and there were lots of parties and picnics and things like that. And what I always noticed was that the man got up to talk and drew all the attention, but where things really happened in terms of like activities and food and everything like that, it was the woman quietly in the background making it all happen. and and I and I, and I one of the things that moved me into this series kind of introspection on love and how it works was that difference. You know, how quite often it's those people that just quietly go about making things work that actually have the most profound impact, and despite the fact that the men are pretending that they're really important. They're the most important. Shout out to mothers.
Course, yes, shout out to mothers and ladies, and even if they're not mothers, a big shout out to you all, because women are nurturing, whether they have children or not. In general, we are nurturers and connect through harmony, right? Loving harmony.
Yeah,
What did we call
right.
it the other just before you said the word?
Yeah, well, it's we were talking about just the natural roles in child rearing.
Yes.
Okay, so once a baby comes into the world, it's kind of attached to the mother in the natural order of things. It's the men can't feed it, and you can't run the baby around in the world. It's kind of very delicate, and so mother has got to try to figure out how to take care of this little thing, and she can't get a book out and show her the picture. Here's how you nurse. Okay, and it's just this very intuitive process, with a lot of encouragement and soothing noises, because the little baby's going to get frustrated when it's not working, everything like that. And so women are kind of designed to just try to be patient and to move towards harmony. Okay, and this shows up in relationships, as you pointed out, which is,
Absolutely.
woman's got a problem, man wants to fix it.
Yes.
Man
This,
wants to make the problem go away. It's not moving towards harmony, it's making the irritation go away.
yes, and that's where the clash kind of happens, right? misunderstanding. But today we're going to go a little bit more specific into the
Mhm.
masculine role in nurturing. Okay, so we know the woman is a nurturer, and that's a natural, innate um, uh, characteristic that a woman has.
Mhm.
But being a man who honors his feelings with no apologies is also very attractive and communicates a lot of strength, right? So you know, I speak for myself, women in general do like a masculine man with nurturing qualities. And, think, well, how can you have both? But this is what we're going to be talking about today. But I just wanted to explain where it seems like a new male is in, the new male image is starting to emerge in today's society. I don't know whether men are starting to realize that or starting to change a little bit in gender roles in ways where men can be both. They can be both nurturing and masculine. So what do you
Well,
share?
let's understand where that comes from. Okay, I mean, you write about the Rambo kind of persona,
Mhm.
and where that comes from is when you go out into the world to confront a grizzly bear or something like that, you don't get do-overs. Okay, you've got to be very precise, and you got to be coordinated as a team, and everybody's got to play their role. And so you can't take a boy out into that environment before you can explain to him what's going on. And this is part of what naturally happens in child rearing as well, which is the father really gets to be interested in children once they can talk, and you can reason with them and explain them to things. And that's part of the process that we get into. Now, where men end up having trouble is when they focus on that model of it's the grizzly bear and everything's a grizzly bear, and you want to take down the grizzly bear and conquer the grizzly bear, and they forget that they've got understanding and expertise that they can share with others. Okay, and that's where that negotiation, I think that men are uh, being encouraged to have more of that role. Quite often it comes through sports. Okay, and so that's a natural transition, which is to think about, look, I've got this understanding about the world and the dangers in it. I'm going to bring this back to my people, my children, my friends, my family, and everything. And rather than being I'm in a competitive mode, I need to conquer and be better than everybody else. I'm going to offer my knowledge to my world and my community so that everybody is more secure and more successful. That's a very delicate balancing act in a
Mm.
competitive world. Um, is that kind of what you're talking about and what you're looking for, you think, is a
Yeah.
woman in a relation with a man?
Um, I think so. I think, and this is where it really gets confusing. I think for men, because they say, "Well, what does she want? Does she want me being that strong, confident, you know, grizzly, or dominant?" Confidence. What's confidence? Because that's quite a wide scale as to how to describe confidence and dominance. Or does she want me, being soft and sensitive? But then if I'm too soft and sensitive, I'm like a perfect expression. I had this conversation with a friend just a couple of days ago, and he said, I don't want to come across like I'm too sensitive, too soft, because she's going to dog me. That's exactly his words, right? So that's I think what happens in a man's mind, where he's coming across. He wants to be loving. He thinks this is what she wants and needs. But then, soon as he does slip into that role, he's ditched. So, there's
So,
this
so the challenge, the
judgment.
challenge, the challenge is that the poor fellow is treating her like a grizzly bear.
Mhm.
He's trying to analyze her and figure out how do you satisfy this beast, okay, and give her what she needs,
Mhm.
okay. And what happens is a woman knows how she wants to feel,
Mm.
okay, and there's multiple dimensions to it, okay. There's a men's group called the Sterling group, And they really focus on this kind of classical model, which is the woman is very emotional. And that's actually where a woman's power comes from, is from being very emotional and exploring the range of emotions and utilizing the range of emotions in a relationship. And a man has got to be strong and stable and a pillar that she can tether herself to. Okay. And you need to be sensitive to where she's going and kind of um, support her in her exploration of the space, but you also need to be strong and say, you're going too far. Come back over here. Okay.
Mhm. Mhm.
So so
Exactly.
so there's also an aspect of this. You're asking for men to be more feminine to find their feminine side. Women also need to do the opposite. They need to have an introspective self, which is masculine, which says, what's the grizzly bear of my emotions? How do I tame it? And they need to be an equal partner in that process. So one of the things that I think is really going on in this process with all this confusion about how we're supposed to be in relationships is we're being forced to learn to be more like each other. Instead of being these complementary kind of, you fulfill this role, I fulfill this role,
Mhm.
okay? Where real satisfaction and nuance and joy is in the relationships is in recognizing that you're influencing each other and that you're growing and learning from each other. And that deepens the relationship and actually makes it more stable. So
Mm.
that's kind of the perspective that I offer to my clients when I'm working with them and they're dealing with relationship struggles. Um, One of the things that I do very much with men, because it's so easy to get in this mental space, a space of analysis, because you've got this grizzly bear and you're trying to figure out its characteristics, even if the grizzly bear is a beautiful blonde. Okay, um, and how to keep it fed and happy and everything like that, which is to bring them down into their heart space.
Mm. Exactly. Yes, and that's so true. And as you said, it's a very a delicate dance between the two. It's a
Hmm.
delicate dance because this is, I think, where men sometimes get lost, if I can say that, because you know, they either say they've got to be one or the other. They can't do the both, the dance of strength and masculinity as well as that sensitive, nurturing side coming through, right?
Yeah, yeah. The strength implies quite often rigidity.
Mm.
And so, one of the things is, I don't know if you've ever seen Calvin and Hobbes, if you've ever seen that comic strip.
No.
Calvin was an autistic boy who had a pet stuffed tiger, and they used to play a game called Calvin Ball. And it was all made up in Calvin's mind, obviously. But he and Hobbes would get to a point where one of them was about to win in the game, and then there would be a subtle change in the rules. And they would assert, oh, but there's this new thing over here we need to pay attention to. Okay, and so what's happening right now in relationships is there's a lot of Calvin ball going on. The classical roles have kind of fallen apart. And so women are asking for different things, men are seeking different things.
Mm.
Okay. But what we tend to do is we're looking for power in relationships. We're looking for influence over our partner. That's how we know that we make a difference, that we have meaning to them, is that we have influence over them. And so, one of the things, again, is that you can find yourself in a situation where you're asked to be strong, but then you're rigid and you're not nuanced and responsive to somebody's emotions.
Mm.
So now you're at fault because you're too rigid. Okay. And so you need to be softer. And what it is, strength and flexibility. This is the Bruce Lee theory of martial arts and why he was so magnificent. It's the Muhammad Ali float like a butterfly, sting like a bee kind of a thing. Okay.
Mm.
Which is not being rigid, but being strong and fluid. And what that requires to be that way is deep self awareness.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Well, we have a viewer here. Hello to William Albert. How are you? Thanks for joining us. He has a comment here, which I'd like to share and read. He says, I've recently felt disconnected, and perhaps it's because I was too busy trying to fit in. I'm a single father raising my two daughters alone and dating. Well, it's a word. Yet I've always felt uncomfortable around the female sort unless I had a few. Tired.
Tied on and I'm tipsy. Yet I was always a good and caring uncle from a big family, so nurturing was already almost second nature to me. So one of the things that alcohol or does for us is it puts us into trance where we can actually feel what's going on inside of us. It gets us to stop thinking about why we're doing and the grizzly bear and what its characteristics are. And it drops us down into a mode where we're actually more aware of the deeper levels of our experience. Okay, and so we're much more responsive to subtle cues in that kind of a process. And so one of the things that is important to understand, it can be helpful to understand, is that falling in love is a trance experience. The
Mm,
reason that we are not in trance most of the time is because the world's a place with hazards in it and we need to protect ourselves from it. When you fall in love, you make this assumption that the other person is going to care for you. And so you fall into trance, and that's why those first few months are so vibrant and alive, and the sex is so good and everything like that, is because you're really allowing yourself to fully feel what's going on. And so to be able to relate and get into that kind of a partnership with some of those initial stages of a relationship, quite often it does help. That's why we drink alcohol in those situations. It does help to have that protective tendency in our mind softened by something, a little bit of something to drink, and then we become more receptive to, the complex signals. Now, the other thing that you can do is you can learn how to just get yourself in trance a different way. There's
exactly.
lots of mechanisms for doing that.
Hmm. Absolutely. I was going to mention that as well. So thank you, Calvin, Albert. So just moving on. So are we are we witnessing this shift away from the Rambo-like warrior style of a man? Is this what's actually happening, to a man who can keep his, you know, uh, sexual romantic side, but who can nurture too? Is this actually happening, or what are your views on that? Are men still struggling with that?
I think a lot of the political, um, a lot of the political turmoil that we're going through right now is actually related to struggles around this very particular issue. You know,
Mm,
um, so
yeah. Okay. So keeping it to what women are attracted to is is the masculine nurturing role offering a new way of redefining what makes relationships or family work.
I'm sorry. Repeat the question there. I've
Oh,
been following some of the dialogue here on the back
okay.
chat. So,
We'll get. Is that relating to what we just spoke about?
well, I'm concerned that we're having some therapeutic issues come up in the back chat, and I would just
Okay.
like to respond that it may be that
Okay.
those kinds of things should be more importantly taken up. This is a conversation for a general audience, and most of the insights that we're offering are kind of just for people that are kind of on the seeking romance, kind of in the typical way. And when there are therapeutic issues that come up, I just want to signal that there are some things that really should be discussed privately.
Mm, okay. So, um, yes. Okay. So Albert just says, please forgive my bluntness, but alcohol was my best friend from childhood and adulthood, and I used to tear down defensive walls from years of trauma. Yes, absolutely. Yep, we can speak about that. Not a problem. It's probably better if we have a little chat one on one. Um, Albert, I think so. And he says romance, love, and alcohol all had a connection to me. Yeah. And I think, you're not the only one. You're really not the only one. And I think there's a lot of, both men and women that have found comfort in, whether it be alcohol, whether it be drugs, whether it be sex addiction, or, other types of addictions. There's different types. But, realizing that and then taking responsibility, the awareness itself is just a start. So thank you for sharing. Thank you. And we can take it further. That's not a problem. But as we're talking about more the relationship nurturing male. So back to that question. Is the masculine nurturing role offering a new way of redefining what makes relationships and family work? Like is this the way the world is going? Like is this the only way? Is this the solution?
Well, I think that um, we are adaptive. We're highly adaptive creatures, and our minds just change all throughout our lives. And this is one of the great hopes of any kind of trauma and therapy involving trauma, is that you focus on the potential. There are strengths in every person, no matter what situation they came from. And you focus on their strengths and identify the potential in those strengths. Um, One of the things that we're confronted with, though, is that trauma exists wherever somebody's being asked to change their behavior against their will. And when you've got a system of relationship which is kind of patterned and stable and kind of working at some level for both sides, and you ask for change, now what happens is there's trauma. Until there's an agreement, until there's a new mechanism. And so what ends up, what I'd like to say is that this is something that every person, this is one of the wonderful things about this period, is that every person gets to choose how they want to be in a relationship. And so there's this new freedom. And one of the challenges is finding the partner who's right for you, who wants to move in that same direction with you. And you identify the same kind of goals in terms of how a relationship should work. And what's important, in order to achieve that, though, you've got to be able to articulate what your goals are.
Mm.
So much of what's happening right now is people had these assumptions and were raised with certain specific assumptions about what a relationship was going to look like. And they read the stories, the Frog Prince, and whatever the heck, you know, uh, and or the knight in shining armor, Snow White, whatever
Live
the heck it was.
happily
And
ev
this is how a
and you
relationship was.
live happily ever after. There's no
Right,
more.
right, right. And so now those patterned kind of cultural expectations, there's this huge richness, and it's learning to articulate and talk about who it is that you want to be.
Mm.
The hard thing is when we go into a situation as a man or woman, say, this is what I expect you to be. So when a woman says, I want you to be strong, but also I want you to be tender and share your emotions and everything like that. Okay. That's not her, that's not fair, you know, to tell somebody else what you want them to be. You're not in control of them. Okay.
Mhm.
What you do is you need to be clear and articulate, this is what I'm looking for. Okay,
Mm.
this is how I want to be in a relationship. And you articulate that and you explain it to people, and then you see who volunteers to sign up for that kind of a relationship. The challenge is that too much of our relationships start with romantic attraction. Okay, it's
Yeah.
a car crash. Let's get into bed together and see how it works. That's driven by very primitive hormones. Okay.
Yes, yes,
And part
yeah.
of the challenge is having enough discipline and understanding what the possibilities are. And this is part of what this conversation is understanding what the possibilities are in relationship.
Mm.
The
Absolutely.
the there are some significant differences. Like we said, women tend to seek harmony and they're very intuitive about it. Men tend to want to solve problems and fix something and move on to the next thing and have this very linear progression towards a goal, towards an accomplishment. Okay, where with women it's much more diffuse. It's very much more difficult.
Yes, yes. So, are women attracted more to the masculine nurturing role than the Rambo warrior style man? I mean, I know I'm asking you, but this is a question for both men and women because men are out there um, interacting with women. But what's your view on this? Like, you interact with a lot of women. I mean, you're obviously, your practice, you have both men and women.
Okay, I'll just
What
tell
what
you.
Tell
I'll
me a
just tell
story.
you a story.
Oh,
I'll
I
just
love
tell you a story.
stories.
So I was working in a company, and we would go out to lunch for pizza once every other week or something like that. And we go to the round table pizza, and we get our order our pizza, and then we get in the salad bar. Okay, for our place at the salad bar. And so one day I'm in the line waiting to get it up to the uh, to the service and to get my lettuce and everything like that. And my friend's a little bit behind me. There's a space between us, and this woman cuts in, and she like smiles at me and everything like that. And I'm just going about putting my stuff together, and I make a comment to her, and I'm making sure she has the utensils, and when I'm done with them, so she doesn't have to fumble for them and everything like that. And I sat down at the table, and my friend goes, "Brian, did you notice that woman? Did you understand what was happening there?" And I said, that happens 10 times a week. Okay. There is, when you are receptive and adaptive and flexible in terms of the way that you relate to people, women find it enormously attractive. Okay.
Mm,
And what I say is it's an open heart. Love is the most attractive thing that you can offer to the world.
mm,
And one of the challenges of being a nurturing male that I had throughout my life, okay, was that our experience of masculine love is so impoverished that when people receive it, they just go completely haywire. William made this statement: it's usually physical before mental attraction. Okay, but there's a
yes.
spiritual component of this as well. And what happens
Mm,
is the spiritual component, when you're really open and receptive in the spiritual realm, it gets channeled by people directly into the physical. They don't ask, why are you like this? They just say, I feel so good when I'm with you. Let
mm,
me get close to, and let me take this into me, is the way that a woman usually feels about it. Okay. And
mm,
so they become very, very amorous. And for me, it's a problem of actually pacing that. But I think that there is this spiritual aspect of things that
mm,
is actually really deep and fundamental in terms of the physical attraction that we feel towards other people, that
mm,
we have some kind of work to do, we have some similarity in our experiences, and that by bearing witness to each other, our souls know that by bearing witness to each other in the most intimate way,
mm, mm.
that
Oh my
we
God,
can understand and help each other heal and grow.
mm,
Okay. And it's taking that, and when you feel that strong attraction, one of the things that I would always do with women is step back and say, let me perceive you, let me see who you are, let me feel you, and let me understand whether I can really love you
mm,
from the mental place, okay, of
mm,
participating with you and helping you to become the person that you want to be.
mm,
Okay.
mm. Oh my God, I'm so glad you brought that up because that is just so fundamental. Like that is, and this is what women say to me, and they say, like, I'm more than just my body. I have a mind, I have a spirit, acknowledge that part of me, acknowledge that spirit of me, acknowledge my mind, how I think. And this is what I say to my men as well, because let's face it, men are just so physical, so visual. It's just and again, a very much an innate thing. It's natural. But if they can
Hmm.
develop that other part of them, that emotional connection and intelligence and that spiritual intelligence to connect with a woman, to be able to, like you, just naturally be that love, emanate that love, coming from that place of just, I see you, not jumping on a woman immediately, but
Right.
just, let me just taste your mind. I had this banner quote that I put up, and it was like, he tasted, he tasted her mind and fell in love. So it was the
Hmm.
mind that he fell in love with. And And this is where I think that, you get a real strong foundation. The roots are really planting in from the beginning when you do pursue or start any kind of, well, not even romantic relationship, any relationship for that matter. Would you agree?
Yeah, I agree, but it's just have sympathy for the poor fella, okay? Which is the poor fella is born to a woman, and to become a man, he has to reject that pattern of behavior.
Mm,
He has to deny that pattern of behavior in himself to become a man, okay? And to explore what it means to be a man. So this dance for a man is very, very delicate,
mm-hmm,
okay? Of being receptive and surrendering to a woman's examination and control, okay? And losing himself as a man. Women talk about this, okay? Which is he seems so strong and capable in the beginning, and then he just becomes this little brat who wants to lay around and be taken care of all the time. It's this slipping into being mothered.
mm,
And it's so it's this very, very delicate dance for a man to maintain his masculinity in that kind of a relationship. So have some sympathy. This is a very difficult trick to learn. And one of the things that has been pointed out just really recently is they discovered they were wondering like why adolescents become so difficult for their mothers. And it turns out that what they've done with studies of their mother's voice is that prior to 13, a mother's voice is the most soothing thing in the world.
mm.
Your specific mother's voice is incredibly soothing. After 13, it is just irritating.
Annoying.
There's some kind of a psychological shift, and when those hormones get into play, okay, where there's just a switch that's thrown, and you want to separate from your mother and go out in the world on your own,
Mm,
and
mm.
that's so
Very,
hard
very
for
interesting.
mothers.
Yes, and yes, very rightly so. I have Oksana. Hello, Oksana. Very dear friend of mine. She says, hello, Stefania. Very interesting conversation. Thank you. Please feel free to comment, Oksana, because she's got always some great comments and questions. So yes, definitely quite an interesting situation. So what would you what would you suggest, what what tips or how to's would you suggest for men, Brian, to you know step into this delicate dance of sensitivity and yet being having maintaining that masculine strength without being a Rambo warrior or
Yeah, it's
grizzly
it's
bear.
really it's really about for me, and I think for many of the men that I work with who are, for example, having trouble with infidelity and things like that,
Mhm,
it's really getting to know your own heart and
mhm,
what's going on inside of it. One of the things that happens with romantic attraction is this incredibly powerful physiological response with the pulse rate going up and the sweating and everything like that. And that's really stimulating and enjoyable, but it's also not sustainable. And one of the things that when you learn to recognize that signal and moderate it and manage it, and a lot of this has to do with breath work,
mhm,
okay, and wait until it's the right time, okay. One of the things that I told my sons when they were coming into puberty and they were saying, Dad, this is just out of control. How do I manage this? And I said, try to keep it in your heart. Your heart manages the flow of blood in your body. Okay. And if you just really focus on being in the heart space when you're relating to people, it really helps to manage that response. It's also a situation where if you focus on the sexual aspect of things and consider it to be the most important in a relationship, you will become more sensitive to it. Okay, because you're telling your subconscious this is what's most important is sex. Okay, and by shifting into the heart, there's a lot of very subtle sensations that occur in the heart.
Mm,
And one of the things that is really transformative for my clients is when they allow their woman into their heart. Then they become a one woman man. Okay, they embrace their woman with their heart, and they know they can feel when they're betraying her that I'm hurting her right now. She may not even know what I'm doing. Okay, but there's some separation, some distance, and it's causing her pain right now. Okay, so it's getting into the heart space and learning to manage that process of allowing somebody into your heart. This happens automatically with your mother. It's just part of being born. You're joined physiologically through the circulatory systems and you're constantly exposed to her heartbeat and everything like that. And part of the process of growing up and separating from mother is about learning to take control of your own physiological responses to things and manage them. So it's just being intentional about this. And when you begin to feel that strong physical attraction,
mm,
okay, turn in and say, what's happening in my heart right now? What am I
mm,
feeling? And what I find is the heart is very sensitive to potential danger. Is this a gold digger? Is this a manipulator?
mm,
Okay, and you'll feel it holding back. And so you proceed, when you get into this space, you proceed with far more nuance and confidence in terms of the decisions you make about the people that you're attracting to you. And you may find that there's actually other people around who are not so flashy and showy that have a lot more substance to them and
mm.
that begin to draw your attention.
Yes, absolutely. But would you say too, would like to add to that where, you know, I know you talk about going into the heart space and really getting connected with self and, allowing yourself to, understand and read, you're basically, your self, your higher self, your being is telling you, yes,
Hmm.
no, she's a gold digger, no, red flags, don't
Right.
go,
There's
danger
danger here
zone,
somewhere.
danger
Right.
zone,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
However, can we fall into this, automatic thinking because of past trauma, because of past hurts and pains that we, can quite easily slip into that. And yet, a man can have a perfect woman that, hey, she's too perfect. It's dangerous. You know what I'm saying? Like, so,
Right.
um, eh, I understand what you're saying, but if someone's coming from that space, that pain, that hurt, that trauma, you know, how do we deal with that? I mean, I usually, from a therapy point of view, we know that we have to heal that past. We may need to go back even into childhood, way back. I'm not sure. It depends once you start working with that person. But, healing, understanding that, hey, I may need some help here. I can't do this on my own. Because if he's repeating the same patterns and he's losing opportunities just because he's going into that fight, flight, primitive area of his mind, he could be self-sabotaging himself, right?
Well, and this is true on both sides of the coin. Um, you know, the um, the challenge in all relationships is to be with the person that you're actually with. And when you've got these old patterns, there is this history, this old history. What's happening is there's a part of yourself inside of you which is trying to figure out how to be safe if they ever experience that again. So you have this traumatic situation in childhood, and there's a part of you inside which has never had a resolution on if I ever experience that again, I need a solution. I need an answer. So what people do in talk therapy is they'll take somebody into that trauma and they'll tell them to push away or do something, and just give that part of them that's kind of trapped in that history an out. This is how you get away. Okay. Now, one of the challenges is that if you express that in a relationship with somebody, when you feel that happening, you're pushing them away physically. Okay, that's going to have a negative side effect. But the goal is to give that part of the mind an out. Okay. Another way to go about doing that is to, again, to focus on the strengths. One of the things that people who have suffered trauma, they've been through trial, and every single day of their lives, they've got to tell that part of themselves inside, no, we're safe now. And they've got to prove that they're safe to that wounded part of themselves every single day. And they have to learn how to block that part out and manage its influence over everything else that they do. And what that actually is, they're doing isometric exercises on themselves, spiritually and mentally, every single day, that people who have had easy lives never have to do. And so what ends up happening is, when you look at how did you get, if this terrible thing, how did you get here? What are your strengths? And you get those listed out. And then what I do in the therapy portion is I put that person, that ideal person with those strengths, up on a staircase. And then the wounded part, which is just the person who's seeking healing, okay, looks up and sees that person on the staircase or the garden path, whatever the heck it is. And this adult self with all these strengths is then walked down to the subconscious mind where that wounded child exists. And all these strengths are brought to the service of that child. So basically, it's saying, here is the God of you. This is your most desired self. This is now the God of you. This is your lodestar. Forget whatever happened. Okay? This is who you are. These are all your strengths. And in dreams, every single night, those strengths will be applied in partnership with that wounded self to find new patterns of behavior that will make sure that you're safe in your life. And
Mm.
then you go out and you have experiences, and we talk about them. Okay. But it's all about being in the here and now in the relationship that you're in, that you have these wonderful, powerful resources
Mm.
to enable you to manage challenge, to manage danger. And you're bringing that awareness into yourself. Then in some cases, you have a very refined sensibility and sensitivity to kind of hazard in relationships. So this is a process which is kind of something that I've developed intuitively, just in terms of working with people and seeing how they respond most effectively in therapy. Um, but it's also celebrating the fact that going through trauma, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Mm.
Okay,
Yes.
and really identifying and celebrating that strength and leaning into it. I had a friend who had two daughters, and one was the wonder child that sang in the choir and got straight A's, and went, like, the choir went to Europe and sang in the opera houses of Europe, and it was, she was just everybody's favorite. Okay, and there was her sister 2 years younger who was a little bit plump and didn't quite know who she was and everything like that. Well, what ended up happening was she almost flunked out of high school.
Mm.
And while her sister went off to Harvard and met a Harvard law student or economist and went on to get married and start this wonderful marriage, well, what happened was the younger daughter finally got herself together and decided she was going to go to college. And he brought them all together at Christmas time. And he said his older daughter was freaking impossible to be around. She was so anxious because her perfect life was no longer perfect. She was having trouble in her relationship with her husband, and they had conflict over who was going to be, who was going to get priority in terms of career and everything like that. And his younger daughter was just this gracious, self aware, focused, constructive person, because
Mm.
she had been through and looked at herself and confronted failure
Mm.
at a younger age. And she knew what her limits were, and she knew who she was. She wasn't this darling that everybody's darling. She was somebody that had to decide who she wanted to be. It wasn't easy for her. So that's what I lean into in terms of the
mm.
therapy that I do with people.
Good, good. So, yeah, which also, bringing it back to the masculine role. I think it's knowing about yourself, isn't it? Really starting with self first, um, and knowing. I think, like you said earlier on, knowing what you want, and then because when you
Yeah,
have
yeah.
clarity,
Knowing where you're going, and
yes,
knowing who you want to be.
mm,
And it's hard for people that have been told the story and grew up with the story.
mm,
And
mm,
we had some comments about this. There's patterns of behavior. Some of them are constructive, and some of them are um, uh, unsustainable.
yes,
Okay, in the long term. And so you've got to go through and examine those in terms of family history, and you're carrying on patterns that were carried forward from the past. Okay, so it can be really hard to decide who it is that you want to be.
mm, mm,
But the thing that if you go back and you talk with people that have lived in those patterns, what you find out is that they were never really happy.
mm.
They just accepted that this was as good as it gets.
Yes, and in some cases, it's cultural as well. You have no
Hmm.
say. You have to conform. You have to take on what's given, and you have to conform, whether you're male or female. But that's for another story, I think. So, Brian,
So, but I think that there's an aspect of this which goes beyond that, which is that you have to stop competing with everybody as
mm,
a man. Okay, there's so much of what we do when we go out to meet women. We're the larger sex in the human species. And the way that this always works is that the sex which stays home and takes care of the children is smaller, okay, whether it's the male or the female. And that that caregiver, the nurturer of the children, okay, makes the other sex compete for attention. And so there's this tendency, natural and also social, for men to prove themselves through competition. And to be really nurturing, you have to be willing to share your strength with other people. That's what being nurturing is really all about.
mm,
And so some things that you can do, in these situations that women really appreciate is you talk about how wonderful your friends are,
mm,
and what their good qualities are. Okay.
yeah,
And now, oh, wow, this is different. He actually pays attention to people,
mm.
and he
It's not all
thinks
about
about them and he
him.
appreciates them. Right.
Yeah, not me, me,
Right.
me, 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 me. And also, in just social interactions with people you don't know. I always say
Right.
that, be really, aware of how you speak to other people when you're in the presence of your partner, whether you're female or male. I think it doesn't matter, because the way
Right.
you're treating people is, you know, what you're going to bring home and back to that relationship, because the way you do one thing is the way you do everything, right? So,
Yeah, and a good example is like the waitress at the restaurant,
yes.
or the hotel bellhop or something like that. And whether or not you act like you're higher than them, which is a competitive act.
Speaking down.
I am superior to you. Okay, I am better than you, and that's why this charming creature is with me and not with you.
Mm,
Okay, so there's always some dealing with personal insecurities. Okay, like you have to prove that this person is with you for a reason. Okay, um, but it's a situation where we're not competing.
mm,
Actually, being aware of the person who's standing in front of you and saying, I want to create a space around this person where they can be their best person around me. And I'm going to be receptive for them being their best person. It's not about proving. I'm going to create conditions using my knowledge of the world and how to communicate with people to actually create safety for them to be the best they can be. which is that thing that you talked about. Rather than being a Rambo, you're being a protector. And I'm going to create safety for the people that I come in contact with so that the experience that my lady has is as harmonious as possible, which
Absolutely.
is really what most women are looking for. It's
Yeah.
harmony.
And I just wanted to add to that, buongiorno, Jim, before we go on. I just wanted to add to that, Brian. And if we look at the animal world, the animal kingdom, and let's specifically go to the lions, okay? The lion is a perfect example of this, where he has strength, he has size, he has composure, he moves, and he's not all grisly. Like he's nurturing when he comes back to his tribe after he's done his hunt or whatever. He comes back and he's still very nurturing with his cubs and his, other half. So I think there's a lot to be learnt there, don't you think? Like that's a perfect example of having that balance. I mean, probably not like a
That's a
lion where you're raw, but you
right.
can still have strength because a lion doesn't have to roar to emanate strength, does he? There are times.
No, and that's a very, the sociology of that. Um, there that is a good metaphor, um, and I think that one of the things that happens among lions is that conflict is really risky, and so what happens is that the strongest male only very really rarely needs to assert himself. He also has all of the reproductive opportunity. Okay, I mean he's all of the females in the den are his um, are going to bear his children. All the other male lions are off in the wilderness somewhere, and they go out and they hunt separately and everything like that. And it's actually the lionesses that do most of the hunting.
Mm,
Um, uh, it's a kind of an interesting dynamic, but yes, it is a situation where that once you've established that position
mm,
and put yourself in a place where a woman is clearly indicated that she wants to be with you, okay, um, if she's really the woman that you want to be with, that's all the pride that you need. There's it's there's no need to roar and puff yourself up and everything like that, but it's that quiet assurance that this is the woman I need to be, and I don't need to compete with anybody else for attention right now because I'm with
mm,
who I want to be. And again, that creates this very safe space for the woman to shine,
mm,
where she can show herself to the world and not feel that she's putting herself into a situation where her man might walk away from her and leave her exposed to the attentions of other men that she doesn't want to have. So it's just that quiet confidence that I am with the woman that I want to be with right
mm,
now. And
mm,
I don't need to show off right now. I
mm.
am where I need to be. And this is something that women need to be very careful with too. I mean, they had there was that musical Evita about Eva Peron in Argentina, and she slept her way to the top of that society and just ruthlessly threw men down that didn't satisfy her ambitions until she got to Juan Perón. And so you can also foster that in your man, that kind of insecurity. And then when you find yourself in that situation, okay, where you're being asked to perform and compete all the time, um, you got to ask yourself, what kind of a man do I want to be? There are men for whom that's very exciting.
Mm.
They really enjoy the struggle. They enjoy the adrenaline. I was working at a company where a guy came up to me once and he said, Brian, isn't it just, don't you recognize how much fun it is to win? He didn't care whether it was the best choice for the customer or the company. He just wanted
I
to
just wanted
win.
to win. Yeah, interesting, interesting. And Jim just adds to that and says, lioness do all the hunting. Yes, they
Right.
do. Lion King waits for food to be brought to him. He does, but he does still have his role, even though, you know, she chooses to go out and do the hunting. I think they've had that agreement for years. But
Well,
you know,
this may be why most men are terrible cooks.
absolutely. Well, you've answered the question that I was going to ask before you answered it was, you know, what would you tell men, right? And you've answered that beautifully without me even asking. Now, just quickly, what would you share with women on the flip side now? Because, you know, you've said, you know, men just, you know, be in your heart space and know what you want and everything you just said. What would you share with a woman? And you said earlier to have empathy or have some kind of patience because, you
To
know,
be understanding. There's something. I wrote a poem about this, which is very, very allegorical and metaphorical, and it's got a lot of interpretations. But one of
you
them was
you wrote you wrote
I
it. Did you?
wrote this poem, but one of
Oh,
them was a father's advice to his daughter
mhm.
about romance. And the first stanza goes, "The earth at night dances with the moon. Cadence and rhythm, their persons speaking of love with power, purpose, and strength, fluttering towards kindred recognitions." And what this means is that when you find yourself moving in the same circles, creating success for yourselves and others, then you will know that you have found your man. If you want to have harmony, it doesn't stop at your door.
Mm,
It connects to the society around you. And one of the things that women do far better than men do is to build a social network.
mm,
And so you want to be in this mode where you're mindful of the fact that it's not just the man, it's the man and you in a community.
mm.
And that's where things stabilize then, where the resources are there for you. And then the next part goes, uh, the shore in dreams graces into the sea. How does the rest of this go? Um, Lifting and rising, breathing in tumbles, tide mingling with sand and of that warming, the two orbs falling finally as one. And this is about romance. When you finally have found your man and you submit to that, okay, wholeheartedly in full confidence that this is the person who is right for you, sex becomes just something completely different.
Mm.
It is so sweet and intense. Okay, when there are no reservations, when there are no doubts. Okay. Now the problem is that it gets interrupted by children. And
Ta-da!
so and so the last couplet is, and yet and still of certain knowledge there is none. There is no certainty in life,
No.
held by confident eyes in children fashioning the sun. And that is the thing. There are so many women that when they have children, they're theirs. But in facilitating the role of the father, okay, in in encouraging him to be connected to and to solve problems for his children, even if it's just learning how to stand up, okay, or crawl or roll over, but just get him involved in that at a very, very early stage.
Page, yeah.
Then they bind you together to an even greater depth. This wonderful project of having these children in your life that grow to the light, that grow to love. And to have a man really be conscious of that, that in taking his problem solving skills, even at the very earliest stage. My son, when he was just learning to crawl, and I was reading lots of books because I was changing careers, and he'd be crawling around, he would come up with this cloth book and he would lay it down in front of me and turn the pages and look up at me.
Say, Daddy
You know,
read.
I am reading just like Daddy's reading. I do books too.
Yeah.
Okay, it was so beautiful. but it's allowing that space and encouraging a man and allowing that kind of a connection, because there are a lot of women who have trouble with that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the child is mine. Um, and so be aware that it goes both ways. So that's kind of the progression for me as I see it, is
Mm-hmm.
for the woman to be aware that it's not just about you and him and children. You want to be confident that there's a community around you that is going to be supporting you, and that you are going to be capable through that support to have more stability in the relationship when things go wrong. And that quite often it's the woman that does that work of creating those connections, those bonds. um, and then, again, enjoying romance and appreciating that. It will be deeper when you have that kind of confidence, and when the community is supporting your relationship. Okay, so that if something goes wrong, they're there for you, and so you can really give fully of yourself. And then the role of child rearing and how it plays. So I guess that encapsulates most of what I have to offer in that regard.
Wonderful. Fantastic. Well, Brian, it's been such a pleasure to be talking to you about this topic. And, it's been a great conversation. And I'm sure we can take it to different levels. Maybe we can have you back on the show if you can slot in some time. It would be great, because I know this topic is really, quite broad, and there's other little areas that we can really tap into. But today has been absolutely fantastic. And I just want to say thank you to the audience that has been listening, um, typing in some messages. Really appreciate you. And if you do watch it on the replay, please let us know. If you have any questions at all, please let us know. Just pop hashtag live or hashtag replay. And of course, Brian, how can people reach you, like, for couples therapy?
Oh yeah, I do individual therapy. Okay,
Mhm.
but I do work with people who are struggling, and quite often what happens is what one person struggle that benefits, as they resolve that, benefits their partner as well. But yeah, I'm Brian at hypnosisrising.com. And that's my website, hypnosisrising.com. So you can read more about some of these issues out there. I do tend to uh, communicate at a fairly high level. But I thank you, Stefania, for bringing me down to earth here today. I enjoy that very much, and so please don't be put off by the most of the writings out at Hypnosis Rising are intended for therapists as opposed to clients.
Yes,
So
yes.
thank you for this opportunity to discuss this with you today, Stefania, and thank you for everything that you do.
Yes, thank you. So I just want to say thanks once again, and I look forward to catching up with you again. So, everybody out there, thank you once again. If you want to share and be on the show, if you have a topic, anything that you'd like for us to talk about, discuss, please type into me at the Gentleman Square, either at support at the Gentleman Square, info at stefaniapulio.com. And be sure to check out our latest information as well on www.thegentlemansquare.com. And I will see you next week on Let's Talk Relationship. Until then, I send you love, I send you passion. Bye for now. Bye.